And because the business environment rank is 43rd in the nation, our access to resources is 19, and the business costs rank is number 38. That puts us as 45th in the state, and I guess that's as good a place to start as any when we're talking about budgets, because nothing gets solved until we improve the business climate in Pennsylvania.
Well, no, and that's the long-term strategy anytime you're dealing with a budget. And when you look at the cost of doing business in PA, most people just assume it's about taxes. It's actually just as much about permitting and regulation. In fact, I hear more from small businesses in particular about the frustrations with the regulation side of Pennsylvania than I do the tax side.
Yeah, absolutely, and that seems to be borne out in this particular study. Well, that is part of any revenue package, is making the revenues available through business and making Pennsylvania a viable working economic climate. You have been involved in the budget discussions heavily here in these last months, and it boiled down to a spending package last week. Now you're working on a revenue package. How are things going?
Things are progressing. They're progressing slowly. I mean, look, you got a $32 billion budget. About $31.5 billion will be raised exactly the same way it was last year. Hopefully, revenues will come in a little bit better than they had over the last year. But it's always that last couple $100 million that holds people up. And, you know, we've been struggling to get an agreement on a number of different things, from liquor reform to a gaming expansion plan and a host of ideas that the governor has put forth.
In your view, what is the best way to find that money?
Well, look, from my vantage point, I would have preferred to cut a little bit more from the budget that the governor proposed back in February. But, you know, sometimes the House ends up being on an island a little bit, and, you know, folks, you know, across the aisle and, you know, the governor's office are willing to go a little bit, not quite as far as the House is willing to go in that regard. But when you look at the spending package that was put together, it's about a 1% increase over last year. And when you compare that to our pension obligations that are mandated, our pension obligations are mandated to increase by over 1% every year. So basically, we were able to find reductions within the Department of Public Welfare to cover the increases in the Department of Education to help bring down the cost overall of government in Pennsylvania. But there's still more work to be done if we want to make a long-term commitment to keeping revenues aligned with expenditures.
There has been debate for many, many years, and always will be, over how much money a state should spend for services for people who obviously do not have the money to cover what needs to be covered in their lives. I'm thinking of human services and those sorts of things. At some point, you draw a line, and then you have to decide every year, do I want to go over that line or under that line? And it seems that once you go over that line and you start to provide funding where you did not before, there's never a way to go back from that, is there?
Well, and the federal government mandates a lot of those programs. And really, you know, when you talk about regulation and policy changes impacting the cost of doing business in Pennsylvania, it also impacts the cost of Pennsylvania's government operating. We have a lot of mandates from the federal government, particularly within human services, that if the federal government would give us a little bit more flexibility to design a lot of the human service programs the way that makes sense for PA and makes sense for individual communities, I'm confident that we can actually save some dollars and still provide those services at a similar level to the folks who need it. Because, look, I mean, the federal government's setting policy for 50 states. How we would handle issues in PA versus Texas, California, Alaska, Hawaii, they're just a little bit different. So I'm hopeful that, you know, we're going to get a little bit more flexibility from the federal government to actually get our Medicaid program in particular, you know, right-sized for Pennsylvania to make sure we can take care of our disabled individuals, our kids, our senior citizens, you know, folks who need these services, but actually at a cost that we can continue to afford in PA.
Representative Dave Reed on the telephone with us this morning, the House Majority Leader, as they continue to work in Harrisburg on the revenue package to meet up and match up with the state spending package that was approved last week. Every year when we do this, we get revenue projections, and it seems like the last 5, 6, maybe even longer years, the revenue projections never match up with the actual revenue coming in. That's the case again this year. How comfortable are you with the way the state projects incoming revenues, and is there a way to make it more accurate?
Well, basically, there are 3 different types of revenue projections that a budget secretary is left to certify. One is a very conservative number, one is a realistic number, and one is a fairly optimistic number. Now, the budget secretary the last couple of years has gone with the optimistic number, which, if you're balancing your own checkbook in your home, you generally want to go with the conservative number. I think this year you're probably somewhere within the conservative/realistic range, which is a better place to be in. And look, there's economic dynamics that are out of our control from a national perspective going on. Hopefully, we're starting to see an uptick in the national economy that will, feed through to Pennsylvania. And, some good news in western Pennsylvania when we're dealing with the energy industry. There was an article out just yesterday about the natural gas industry starting to turn the corner and seeing some better movement in 2017 than they had in 2016. So that could really help the state of Pennsylvania and local communities who receive impact fee dollars like Indiana County.
Yeah, absolutely. Representative Dave Reed on the phone with us. When you are so consumed by the budget talks in Harrisburg for more than half a year, and sometimes 3/4 and over a year, a couple of years ago, when everything is so focused on that, are there other priorities in Harrisburg from a lawmaker standpoint that you think get pushed back too far and you never get the time to pay proper attention to them?
I think there's a lot of items out there that, if we were in better budgetary times, folks would like to have a broader discussion on. But right now, you're right. Things are focused on the financial side of the world. And, it doesn't mean things get pushed the whole way to the back burner, but it's just financial items take precedent. And, in the last month, actually since we were on the radio last time, we've actually passed pension reform. It's become law with an agreement with the governor. So, that's a pretty major public policy reform that, although it's not a direct budgetary impact, that's one of our big cost drivers every year. So, a lot of those items related to the budget become, I guess, a little bit more of a priority. And, some of the other items do have to sit and wait for another day, unfortunately.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that pension agreement because we haven't had a chance to talk about it. Was it substantially different in any way from what the governor agreed to last year but then put off?
No, actually very, very similar. A couple of the numbers changed here or there, but nothing groundbreaking. And I think it just, the extra 6 months gave folks a little bit more time to refocus, Republican and Democrats. And, the governor got a little bit more involved in actually helping to secure some Democratic votes for the package. And at the end of the day in the House, I think it passed with about 143 total votes, over 100 Republicans and about half of the Democratic caucus as well. So, it ended up being a very bipartisan plan to help restructure that system going forward. Obviously we've still got to make our payments for retirees and our active employees, but it's an example of long-term thinking once in a while in government as opposed to just always thinking about the here and now.
Well, how big of a game changer is it? I think that it's going to be a huge difference, not only in the budget-making process, but in the way that school districts and others operate.
Well, it is. And again, it's not going to solve this year's budget for anybody, but long-term, from a school district perspective, a superintendent or a business manager is not just projecting out a budget for 1 year. They're looking at, okay, what about 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road? And all of a sudden that cost curve is going to be different. And, school board members and teachers and legislators and governors in the future are going to be faced with less difficult decisions because this year we actually passed pension reform.
State Representative Dave Reed with us for just another minute. Representative Reed, how long do you expect this whole process to take place in Harrisburg? I know that's a really uncertain and probably not a fair question.
Well, optimistically, we have until Monday to get an agreement with the governor because then he has to decide what he wants to do with the budget bill. He gets 10 days to decide whether he wants to veto it, whether he wants to let it become law, or whether he wants to sign it. So everybody's pretty focused on that Monday at midnight deadline right now. That doesn't mean everything has to wrap up by then, but I think folks are pretty focused on seeing what can get done here through the weekend.
Well, good luck to you and everybody else working on that very difficult question in Harrisburg. And thanks for getting to us this morning. We appreciate it.
You're welcome, Todd. Have a great week.
You too. Oh, while I still have you here, can I ask you one more question? Sure. We had talked earlier about your schedule here within the district and whether or not you've been able to find the time to set up any town hall meetings. Have you done that yet, or is that still on the back burner until we get this?
It's still in progress. I actually talked about it with Jonathan and Adrian in my office yesterday. We're we're looking to try to add a couple town hall meetings here over the summer, maybe one in July and one in August. Looking at dates, once we get this all wrapped up in Harrisburg, then we can solidify those dates. But I always like to try to get a couple in over the summer, then we'll do 3 or 4 in the fall as well. So as soon as we get business closed with the budget, we'll get those dates finalized, and we'll make sure to get them over to you guys too.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks, Todd.
Wonderful day. Bye-bye.